everyone can hear me with this fancy headsets. Welcome. It's really great to have you all join us today, particularly in person and also virtually to everyone that's tuning in. And today we're going to explore a little bit about how governments are collaborating to supercharge, pun intended, their journeys towards 100% zero emission vehicles. My name is Aneza Pinto. I'm a transport policy manager at the Climate Group, and we are the secretariat for the Under 2 Coalition. The Under 2 Coalition is the largest global network of states and regions committed to reducing emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. We're over 200 governments representing 50% of the global economy and 1.75 billion people. And our greatest strength is our ability to work together and find solutions as a group through peer learning and inspiring ambitious action. For our work on transport, you may have just watched a short video about the ZEV community, which is an established platform for governmental peer learning on zero emission vehicles. And this is co-hosted by the Under 2 Coalition and the ZEV Alliance in partnership with C40 Cities and US Climate Alliance. This community is supported by the Scottish Government and the Climate Works Foundation, and with contributions from the Government of Quebec. Through the ZEV community, cities, states, regions, and nations from around the world are coming together to learn about new initiatives, exchange information, experiences, and best practices. And through this collaboration, governments are developing the knowledge needed to set ambitious targets, switch public fleets to electric or zero emission, and roll out supportive infrastructure required for this change, as well as implement innovative policies. We now reach a network of over 500 participants in over 90 governments worldwide. And we're all here at COP, and this represents a tremendous opportunity for major fleet owners and operators to drive action on clean road transport and send a demand signal that this transition is happening, it is inevitable, and zero emission vehicles are the future. So why is this important? Fleets make up only a quarter of all vehicles on the road, and yet they contribute 2/3 of on-road transport emissions. And both businesses and governments have their responsibility and an opportunity to take action. And governments can do so through the ZEV Pledge for Public Fleets. And as you can see on the next slide, the ZEV Pledge for Public Fleets asks governments at all levels, as well as individual departments, agencies, and public sector bodies, to pledge to convert their entire leased and owned fleets, where feasible, to zero emission vehicles by the timelines stated on the slide. Buses by 2030, 2- and 3-wheelers by 2030, light duty vehicles by 2035, and medium and heavy duty by 2040. This is in line with the target set by the UK presidency and also by the global MOU for medium and heavy duty vehicles you may have heard of launched today. And you only need to commit to one of these targets to be part of a leading group of governments that have already signed. And these are the Scottish Government, our first signatory, and they will be here today with us for an opening speech. We've got New York City, and you'll be able to see that on the next slide. New York City, British Columbia, Washington State, the United Kingdom, Quebec, New York State, the state of California, and Jalisco in Mexico. Together, so you have an idea of this impact, these 9 governments have committed to converting over 157,000 vehicles. Of those, 52,000 are medium and heavy duty vehicles. This is equivalent in very average numbers to the energy consumed in almost 1.3 million homes in 1 year in the US. So just imagine the impact that we could have if only 50 governments rose to the challenge. And I think we can do it. We've got a big community of governments here through the ZEV community, through the Under 2, through the ZEV Alliance. So my invitation to governments is really that you rise up to this challenge to contribute to this global momentum on climate action and lead by example to build a cleaner, healthier future. And with this invitation and this challenge, I'd like to welcome Mr. Graham Day, Minister for Transport at the Scottish Government, to give an opening address. Minister, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I begin by saying how genuinely delighted I am to be here this afternoon to welcome you all to the Climate Group's Cities, Regions and Nations event. It is wonderful to see such a broad representation of the international community gathered today, and it demonstrates the potential of the work of the Under 2 Coalition, the Climate Group and the ZEV Alliance to deliver transformational change for transport across the globe. That transport needs to change is undeniable, we know that. While sectors such as energy have rapidly decarbonised, transport has remained stubbornly high in terms of being a carbon emitter. The time for considering or pursuing solutions for the low-hanging fruit has passed. We are in the midst of a climate emergency. Climate change is no longer a distant future threat. Solutions are required not only for light road transport, but also freight, rail, shipping and aviation. One of the questions that I've been asked over the last few days is what meaningful contributions can a small country like Scotland make to enabling ZEV transition? The answer is quite a lot. Scotland has already more than halved its greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 levels. That's faster than any G20 country. And we've set ourselves ambitious, legally binding targets to reach net zero emissions by 2045. Scotland might be a small country, but it's a country of pioneers and inventors. And when it comes to solutions for zero emission transport, Scotland is leading the way. We have a history of innovation and invention. The first mechanically propelled bicycle, the pneumatic tyre, the first passenger steamboat in Europe, the first practical screw propeller, and the telephone. Some even credit the invention of the first electric car to a Scot, Robert Anderson, in the 1830s, but I'll accept that may be disputed. More recently, Scotland's contribution in the energy and low carbon transport sectors has included the development of some world-leading projects, and these typify the way that Scotland has a history of turning geographical challenges of rural and island communities, for example, into opportunities for innovation. In Scotland, our strengths in terms of renewable energy, the internationally recognised reputations of our academic institutions and engineering skills create opportunities to decarbonise the transport sector, including through batteries and energy storage, hydrogen production, fuel cell development, and the development of zero emission component systems and the drivetrains for specialist heavy duty vehicles across road, off-road, rail, maritime and aviation. Looking at hydrogen particularly, Scotland is particularly well placed to take advantage of the benefits of hydrogen for transport, with 25% of Europe's offshore wind capacity around our coastline. In Aberdeen, there's a cluster of hydrogen activity with 2 publicly accessible hydrogen refuelling stations and one of the largest and most varied fleets of hydrogen vehicles in Europe. Earlier this year, the Granite City saw the deployment of the first hydrogen double-decker buses in the world. We also have ADL, an internationally successful bus manufacturer with innovative zero emission offerings, including a new hydrogen bus, which will offer a range of 300 miles. And finally, we have a hydrogen train project in Bo'ness being taken forward by Transport Scotland in conjunction with Scottish Enterprise and the Hydrogen Accelerator based at the universities of St Andrews and Strathclyde. Working with the private sector to achieve progress is key. And the Scottish Government has a track record of listening to and working with industry to develop the sustainable mobility sector. And that particularly includes our work with industry through our Automotive Industry Advisory Group and our Bus Decarbonisation Task Force, and the activity that has helped to prioritise, including just over £50 million of public sector funding and £71 million of private sector investment to bring 272 zero-emission buses to Scotland's roads, more than 200 of which were manufactured here in Scotland. This work is vital. It's only through collaborating with the private sector that we will achieve transformative change. By working hand in hand with industry, we can set the pace. Because it's not just about getting to net zero that's key, it's how we get there. The Scottish Government is clear on the need for a just transition to net zero, and we were the first country in the world to set out a national just transition planning framework. In decades gone by, Scotland suffered from poorly managed deindustrialisation, with the impacts still being felt by communities today. The Scottish Government, which has come into existence, I should say, since that damage was inflicted, is determined that this will not happen again, and we're taking steps to ensure it cannot. For example, our Plugged In Communities programme is helping to reduce private car usage and ensure that electric vehicles are accessible and affordable by enabling communities to share access to EVs through car clubs so that no one is left out of the benefits that modern electric vehicles can offer to our climate and to our air quality. Projects like the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park provide a fantastic example of how industrial sites and a skilled local workforce can evolve to become a pivotal part of the low carbon economy, strengthening communities and setting Scotland on the path to a truly greener future. Whilst decarbonisation of transport technology is important, we cannot reach net zero without behaviour change. In Scotland, as in the rest of the world, there are still far too many journeys that are made by private car. And we're not shying away from this challenge in Scotland. And we made a world-leading commitment to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030. We'll publish the plan for that in the coming weeks. Now, we know that this is an ambitious target, and it's one that will take the whole of Scotland working together to achieve. As I said, we'll publish our route map very shortly, and I know that the conversations that have been taking place over the last 2 weeks will play a key role in the work that my officials are undertaking to prepare it. A move to active travel will also be key. And once again, I think we're leading the way. Through the historic Butte House Agreement, the Scottish Government has committed to increase the active travel budget to 10% of the total transport budget by 2024-25. That will equate to an active travel budget spend of £58 per head of population in Scotland, compared to £30 per head in leading European countries and £10 per head in England. When active travel is not a possibility, public transport should be the next step. Once again, we're leading the way with 76% of Scottish rail passenger journeys and 45% of freight journeys made on electric trains. Now, rail only accounts for 1.2% of all emissions for transport in Scotland, so there's a real opportunity to increase journeys by zero emission rail and reduce the number of journeys made by road. When public transport is by road, we want to ensure it's the fastest, cheapest and most efficient means of getting from A to B, and that's why we're investing £500 million in bus prioritisation measures, as well as funding decarbonisation of bus technology. So you get why my answer to that question, what meaningful contributions can a small country like Scotland make, is so positive. As First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has pointed out, small countries have often stepped in on climate when bigger countries have failed to act. We note the fact that it was Bhutan which became the first country in the world to commit to being carbon neutral. And since then, 130 countries have followed suit. And that when Donald Trump took America out of the Paris Agreement, it was a coalition of states and cities that kept the momentum going. We're clear in Scotland that smaller countries can lead the way, not just with aspiration, but with tangible delivery, and can go further and faster. That's never more the case than when we collaborate and we learn together alongside our international partners. We know that Scotland's contribution alone will not be enough, but we want to share our expertise and our skills with others, as well as learn from our friends overseas, because it would be deeply arrogant on our part to fail to recognise that there are best practice examples out there that we can adapt or replicate. And that has been my biggest takeaway from COP, learning of what's happening elsewhere across the planet. So we're very proud to be closely engaged with the ZEV community for the past 2 years, working in partnership with the Climate Works Foundation and the Government of Quebec, alongside other partners who share our vision for a zero-emission transport setup. This partnership is an example of the type of collaborative action we hope to encourage an international community with governments from all over the world at any level, sharing their experiences and knowledge, working together towards the common goal of a low-carbon transport. So I very much welcome you today. I very much welcome the opportunity we've had so far. We in the Blue Zone are in the privileged position of having influence over transition. I'm delighted to open today's session and welcome the discussion about how we can work together to make it happen further, faster, together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your inspiring words. And earlier this year, we had the pleasure of virtually taking the whole of the ZEV community on a trip to the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park to show off all of the innovations. So now I'd like to welcome on stage Mr. Dale Hall from the International Council on Clean Transportation, our more technical partner, to give you some of the numbers.
certainly. Thanks, Aneza, for the introduction, and thank you, Minister Day, for that inspirational speech. I definitely agree that small countries can play a big role in showing the way forward. That's definitely something we've seen throughout the ZEV transition and part of our strategy in the ICCT as well. You can go to the next slide. So to kind of give us some motivation today, I'd like to talk about where we're at in the ZEV transition and the role that different stakeholders can play. And I'll start out with the good news, which is that we are at a moment where there is a really clear solution to decarbonizing road transport that has developed faster than I think almost anyone has expected. Just a few years ago, when we were creating the International ZEV Alliance, we committed to phasing out new combustion engine vehicle sales by 2050. And we thought that was an ambitious target. But 5-6 years later, things have moved so fast that many countries around the world, as you can see, have started to move toward 100% zero emission vehicle sales by 2035 or even earlier in some leading markets, as early as 2025 in Norway even, where more than 2 out of 3 new cars sold in the past couple months have been electric. So this is really exciting, and the transition and the commitment to zero emission vehicles is spreading around the world. It's not just Northern Europe or California anymore, although of course those places should be celebrated. But we're also seeing Chile release a really ambitious electric vehicle strategy, and Cape Verde off the coast of Africa also committing to the same timeline. And we've seen even more countries commit today. But on the next slide, I'll show you the challenge that's still ahead. Those commitments look great, but when you plot the sales so far through 2020 in these same leading countries, for the most part, we are still at the very early stages and we need very steep growth. We need something like 20% annual increase in electric vehicle sales share sustained over the next decade in order to meet these targets for 2035 or even earlier in these leading markets. That's doable, but especially as the scale of the vehicle scales up and we get into the mainstream market where different challenges emerge, we're going to need some new policies that haven't been what we've used in the early market. And national governments are probably going to have a tough time doing all of this themselves. Now, the fortunate thing is, on the next slide, you can see that national governments aren't the only ones that are trying to drive the transition forward. City governments and local governments are also equally ambitious, or sometimes even more ambitious in promoting electric vehicles and zero emission transportation. We've done a series of studies at the ICCT over the past few years called Electric Vehicle Capitals. And what we found is that just 25 metropolitan areas around the world have contributed 40% of all electric vehicle sales. So 40% of all electric vehicles in just 25 metropolitan areas. And that's due to support from the national governments, but also a lot of innovation at the city level. And cities are looking to go forward even faster, as you can see on this slide. This shows some targets for city governments, not just to phase out new internal combustion engine vehicle sales, but to convert all of the vehicles in the city to zero emissions by as early as 2030 in some cities like Stockholm, Paris, Amsterdam, and Oslo, and as soon as 2050 in other cities, which is still a very ambitious target when we're talking about all vehicles on the road. And that's really what we need to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less and stay on a Paris-aligned track. So the question is, how can all of these governments meet these targets and maintain this steep rate of progress? Well, on the next slide, you'll see the key is working together, because no government has all the tools that they need to ensure that this transition can happen affordably and equitably and at the pace we need. We know a lot of the early growth has happened by top-down policies like financial incentives, CO2 regulations, ZEV regulations, but there's a lot of policies that cities can also use to influence consumer behavior. including zero emission zones, congestion charging, and providing parking benefits. And everyone can help with perhaps the biggest challenge of all, which is the charging infrastructure ecosystem, making sure that our buildings and our power grid are ready and creating charging for all types of vehicles and all users. And what we see is that the places where electric vehicle transition is happening fastest are the places where national governments and local governments and city governments are all working together and are collaborating, and there's a comprehensive suite of policies by all of those actors. And that's what we're hoping to facilitate through the ZEV community. And that's what we're hoping to learn more about today on our panel with leaders from different segments and different levels of government. So I think I'll hand it back to Aneza and look forward to speaking with some of the leaders here on our panel.
Thank you so much, Dale. It's always interesting to put things into perspective with some numbers, and it's also a great overview of the global landscape and the key policies available to governments. And the word across COP has been collaboration. So now is the time we've been waiting for. And I'm going to call on our great panel of speakers to join us on stage, starting with Mr. Benny Engelbrecht, Minister for Transport at the Danish government. Please, everyone. Leanne Randolph, Chair of the California Air Resources Board. Jeremy Hewitt, Assistant Deputy Minister for Environment and Climate Change at the Government of British Columbia. And finally, Diego Rivot Marcet, Director of Sustainability and Innovation in Vitacura, Santiago, Chile. Thank you very much. And our moderator will be an EV researcher because they know how to ask the good questions. So I will hand over.
I'll see. I'll do my best. Well, I am really excited to have a group of leaders here representing a national government, two regional, state and provincial government, and a city level government. And each of these governments is a leader within their own region in the transition to zero emission vehicles, and some of the leaders globally, in fact. And so I think, you know, this panel in general, we want it to be a discussion. We want to foster collaboration across these different levels. So please feel free to respond to one another, ask questions to one another. But I think I want to first just get a little sense of why each of your governments are working to transition to zero emission vehicles and the strategy and the targets that you've set. And we will start with you, Minister Engelbrecht. Denmark is a leader on transport electrification in Europe and has one of the strongest targets, I believe, of any country. So could you talk about, the targets that you set, how you set those, and the policies that you plan to use to make sure that you can meet those targets?
Yes, of course, Dale. And it's not to peer review your excellent numbers that you just had, but on the first of your slides, it said that we had a phase out date of 2035. On the second, it said 2030, and the second is the correct one, just to put things right.
I made the second one.
Yeah. So, but anyway, there's no doubt that the transport sector is the most difficult sector to reduce the CO2 emissions within. There are a number of different things that you can do. Electrify all the public transport systems. For instance, we've already decided that in Denmark, whether it's buses or trains or whatever, ferries as well. But the large chunk is the road transport. And there are some really difficult factors there. Heavy duty vehicles are really difficult, but the technology when it comes to private cars is there. And therefore we need to change private cars into zero emission vehicles. And therefore we need to set a date for the end of production of traditional fossil fuel cars. And therefore it's an obvious choice. Basically, you can ask yourself, how long lifetime does a car have? Somewhere between 15, 20 years. And therefore, if we need to have a net zero emission free society no later than 2050, well, basically we need to stop selling fossil cars no later than 2030. It's just a question of looking at the timeline, basically.
Great, thank you. And I think that's the approach that we need to be taking, all the governments here. If we take the net zero date seriously, we got to work backward, and that means we don't really have too much time to spare. So next, I'd like to turn to California and Chair Randolph. California and the Air Resources Board in particular has been a real innovator and trailblazer in creating regulations that really have forced the emergence of this technology and have benefited so many other jurisdictions. And but now California has set a target to get to 100% zero emission vehicles, and that's going to require some new tools beyond the original ZEV regulation. And so I'd like to hear your perspective on how your approach is changing as you're looking toward 100% and what new tools California is looking to deploy with the authorities that it has.
Right, thank you. California does have ambitious targets. Governor Newsom issued an executive order last fall calling for 100% sales of light duty vehicles by 2035 and medium and heavy duty vehicles by 2045 and off-road equipment as well. And so operationalizing that is going to take a lot of work. California has traditionally deployed a suite of strategies. We have our regulatory requirements that mandate the production and sale of cleaner and zero emission vehicles. We have robust incentives that help get those vehicles out to market and get folks buying those vehicles. And we have a lot of work going on and to go on in the infrastructure space, making sure that there's charging infrastructure and fueling infrastructure for the zero emissions vehicles. And so we really need to be doubling down on all of those strategies. So I'll just mention a couple of the key things that we're doing differently. This year, the governor and legislature appropriated $3.9 billion to support development of infrastructure and to provide incentives for vehicles. So we will be using that to roll out new drayage trucks, new transit buses and school buses, and deploying the infrastructure that needs to support that. Another area that we're looking at, we have a new suite of light duty vehicle regulations to take us from model year 2026 all the way to the full zero emission transition. And so that suite of regulations, which is currently under development, is looking at how we can ensure a robust secondary market. So one of the strategies we're deploying in those rules is requiring battery life assurances and requiring data so that when folks purchase a used zero emission vehicle, they know what the health of that battery is, because we're used to cars lasting for 100,000 miles. And we want to make sure that zero emission vehicles have that same robustness and there's confidence. And then lastly, I'll just note that we are really leaning into equity in our incentive strategies. The board later this month is going to be adopting a new funding strategy for our incentives. And part of that strategy is really trying to provide incentives for more incentives for lower income drivers, and then also providing incentives in the used vehicle market so that we can really try to hit all segments of the population and deploy infrastructure in all communities in California so that everyone has access to the zero emission vehicle transition.
Great, thank you. I think that's a great encapsulation of how California is really looking at all of the barriers to zero emission vehicles and making sure that everyone is brought along in the process. And it's going to be even more important as we look toward the mass market and getting all the way to 100%. But next I want to move to British Columbia and Mr. Hewitt. Of course, you know, California was a leader in many things, but British Columbia was the first jurisdiction to create a legally binding requirement that got out to 100%. And of course, I hear you've recently updated those targets. So I'd like to hear about those goals and those targets, and also what lessons you learned through the process of creating this, the first legally binding 100% policy, and the other supportive policies that are going with that to make sure you can meet it.
Thanks. Well, it's fantastic to be on this panel. Just for context, BC, British Columbia, is a province on the Pacific coast of Canada. We've got a population about the size of Denmark, a little smaller, and we're about 12 times the size of Scotland in terms of land mass. So Vancouver is the city I think the majority of people associate with BC. So two things to your question, Dale. First is, frankly, the pace and scale of the transition. So we passed the legislation in 2019. And at that time, it was thought to be incredibly ambitious to set a target in Canada for 10% in 2025, 30% in 2030, and 100% by 2040. Well, just this last quarter, we hit 12.5%. So what is that? 3 years early, 4 years early. So that's been remarkable. And frankly, it's been driven a lot by the industry. And you said we've updated those targets now to a 90% target by 2030 and a 100% target by 2035. The other lesson I guess I want to pick up on, and it's great, the chair mentioned this, it's first of all, no surprise, people are extremely fond of cash incentives. So there was a short time in BC where you could get about $15,000 to $16,000 off an EV. And we had an impossible time keeping up with that amount of money going out the door. So we had to reduce that amount a little bit. But we also want to really make sure that the money we are spending is going to the people that need it most. So we're doing a couple things. One is we capped the maximum purchase price for vehicles at $55,000. So you can't buy, $150,000 Porsche EV and get an incentive. You'd get nothing for that. And the second is we're moving our incentives to be income tested. And so again, picking up on the chair's comments in California, we really want to bring that equity lens and make sure that we're providing the support to those that need it most.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we're seeing some commonalities and learnings across different jurisdictions, which is exactly what we want to hear and exactly what COP is about. So now, of course, we come to our city representative on the panel, Diego from Santiago. And Santiago is a city that does have strong environmental targets, has issues with air quality, and so electrification is a big priority. And we know that there's been a lot of progress on electric buses in Santiago, but as we heard, as I said on the presentation, cities often have limited authorities, and it's always a balance on what you can do. So I'd be interested to hear about your experience with cooperating between different subnational jurisdictions to make progress on the bus fleet, and what other initiatives you're working on in terms of electrification in Santiago and Vitacura.
Well, first, I want to thank this invitation. It's an honor to be in representation of Chile, the municipality of Vitacura, and my mayor that unfortunately couldn't be here. And now about your question. Indeed, Santiago has the second largest electrical buses fleet all over the world now. We already have 784 electrical buses already in operation. And next year, going to start to operate 91 that they are already granted. So it's really proud to have this notice. But the thing is, Santiago didn't start with this measure recently. We started 30 years ago establishing these special measures and unprecedented for Latin America to affect all the main pollution sources of the city, especially the transport sector. I'm speaking about like to eliminate lead or reduce sulfur of our fuel, to change all the transport buses fleet for the best technology available during the 2000, or of course the introduction of electrical buses, or to demand the best engine qualities for our vehicles, as the same is rolling now in Europe, that's Euro 6, and the commitment that you were saying before, that to stop the sale of conventional vehicles starting on 2035. All these measures has allowed us to reduce our pollution in the city more than 50%. And all are the results of the international collaboration. Indeed, the introduction of the electrical buses started with a pilot plan between the municipality of Santiago, BYD as truck brand, the sponsorship of the Minister of Transport, and also the advisor of C40 and another international organization. So I want to conclude that that's the key. We need the international information, the international data to accelerate this process of zero emission vehicles.
Thank you. I think that's exactly why we're here. And I like your point about the long time scale. It takes a lot of planning. But I think Minister Engelbrecht wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, basically, it's just because I wanted to emphasize your example. It's almost 2 years ago we had the COP25, and that was, well, we did have a transport day at the COP25, but to be frank, we weren't that many ministers of transport that participated. That has changed a lot. That's a good thing. And one of the examples that I, as a participant at the COP25, learned about was the Santiago example. And when I heard that you could succeed with that, with your ambitions, I thought we should be able to do something similar in a developed country like Denmark. So actually, we took your example and we approached the 98 municipalities in Denmark and the 5 regions and said to them, can we do a partnership and make sure to roll out even more electrical buses in Denmark? And what we achieved by doing that was to put a pressure on the market, a demand for only electrical buses, which means that now when you tender a bus route in Denmark, the tender price is the same for an electric bus as for a diesel-driven bus. And that's a real game changer. So now there's no price difference between the zero-emission vehicle and a diesel-driven vehicle. So now there's no real reason for not going electric, for not going zero-emission. And to put things into perspective, we've gone from a few percentage of bus routes in Denmark that are operated electrical to a number that is currently with the tenders going out will be 68% of all bus routes in Denmark, all bus-driven kilometers in Denmark will be electric, basically because of your example. So that demonstrates that the COP is actually a place where you can also share experience. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you for jumping in. And it's hard with only one mic, but I guess if anyone else at any time wants to jump in, please do. Yeah.
Can I jump in on something? I think that conversation really highlights how effective a fleet strategy is, right? It's like going first for those transit fleets, those school bus fleets. In California, we adopted our advanced clean truck regulation, which brings our trucks to zero emission by 2040. And accompanying that, we're working on an advanced clean fleets regulation to require fleet owners to transition their vehicles to zero emission vehicles. And so, using those strategies to really build the markets. And so then that means you end up with all of these medium and heavy duty vehicles that will be purchased by fleets, which tend to turn them over faster. And then they'll go out to the market for individual truck owners and smaller fleets to be able to purchase. So it really builds on itself and creates a lot of progress.
Thank you. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting regulations that we've been tracking and analyzing at the ICCT. So really excited to see that. I think that Minister Engelbrecht actually read my mind where I wanted to go next, which was to try to get some examples and some lessons about collaboration among different levels of governments for the national and the regional governments here, how are you working with local governments? What are some examples of progress or some lessons learned? And then also for any of the speakers, how are you working with the governments above you, the national or even the European Union government? I'd like to hear some examples.
Well, a very good example is, of course, our climate partnerships, where we go into collaboration with our municipalities and our regions. We have a set target in Denmark for reducing our CO2 emissions by 2030 by 70%, which is very ambitious. And of course, we can't reach that target without everyone participating, private organizations, the industries, the municipalities, the regions, and so on. So of course, we need to make that collaboration. Within the transport sector, we've made 27 partnerships with municipalities in all our 5 regions for setting goals for the number of zero emission vehicles within buses, within other types of, for instance, cars, personal cars, and within the public fleet, and other vehicles that are being used in the municipalities. But of course, Denmark is a part of the European Union. So we do also have a collaboration within the European Union, and one of the very important tasks there is, of course, to set an ambitious goal, not just for Denmark, but for all of Europe, for a end date for the production of fossil fuel cars. And therefore, it was a great pleasure when Denmark and other European countries achieved that. The European Commission, in their 50 for 55, came out with an end date for 2035. Of course, we'll keep pushing for an earlier end date, no doubt about that. But that clearly shows that regardless whether you're a nation like Denmark, or you're a state, or your region, or whatever, you do have a collaboration between your level of government and other levels of government, which is extremely important to be able to reach those goals, regardless how ambitious they are.
Absolutely. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. The partnership with local governments is really important to our work, making sure that we are building the infrastructure and deploying the charging infrastructure, and understanding all of the mobility issues in particular communities, so that we are addressing charging in multifamily dwellings, we're addressing public charging, giving folks an opportunity to really use their vehicles as effectively as possible. And of course, supporting non-vehicle mobility. We incentivize everything from electric bikes to infrastructure to support walking and taking alternative methods of transportation, and of course, public transit. And I liked your slide in your presentation where you talked about what local governments can do, because we've been working with cities like Los Angeles on things like pickup zones, zero emission vehicle zones, favored opportunities for zero emission vehicles in ways that really helps provide those non-financial benefits, those kind of operational commercial benefits to zero emission vehicles. And that collaboration is really important.
Thanks. I'll give one example at the federal level and one at the local government. So at the federal level, I think it's fair to say both BC and California have a very good history of pushing federal governments to do more. I think it was in 2007, the federal governments in both Ottawa and DC weren't particularly interested in moving forward on tailpipe emission standards for vehicles. The governor of California at the time and the premier of BC got together and set harmonized standards, which a number of other provinces and states signed on to, and eventually the federal government picked up. So that's one example at the federal level, and we've seen that again in Canada with the ZEV standards. At the local government level, and this is actually kind of a new one to me. So about 40% of people in BC live in a strata environment, so like a condominium. So if you live in a condo now, an apartment, and you want to install a charger in your parking spot, you have to wait for an annual general meeting of the Strata Council and get 2/3 of, and I don't know if it's just the council or everyone in the building, to approve it. And that is obviously a major barrier to folks that want to go to EVs. So this government's now moving forward with a legislative amendment to fix that. That'll prohibit strata councils to deny any sort of reasonable request for EV charging station installation.
Yeah, well, first, I want to thank your kindly words. It's an honor to know that Chile is teaching Europe and not in otherwise. But as example, I want to say that in the municipality of Vitacura, we are working out in a pilot plan to bring the first garbage electrical truck to Chile. And it's going to be the result of international collaboration. We are working with C40 as advisor, with the trucks brand companies, and also with the sponsorship of the transport minister and with our recollection garbage company. If this pilot works, and I'm sure it will, everyone's going to win, because the trucks company is going to open a new market to sell its trucks. This garbage recollection company is going to have a special acknowledgement to confront the future public tenders. And the municipality of Vitacura, we are going to introduce this electromobility to a new sector, and immediately we are going to reduce our carbon footprint. So that's the key.
Fantastic. I think those are all, yeah, some really fantastic examples. I want to talk a little about the challenges now and some of the issues that I know we're all facing, because we're not all to zero emission vehicles yet. But I would be interested in hearing what one of the main challenges that your government is facing and planning to tackle now, and what roles you see for other stakeholders, other governments to help you overcome some of those challenges. Yeah, where you need help, I guess is what we're saying. We need to be a little vulnerable here.
Well, in California, we are dealing with challenges around infrastructure deployment. As I frequently put it, in California, we are both mitigating and adapting to climate change at the same time, because with the severe climate effects that are causing wildfires and drought, we need to harden our electrical grid, which means that has a direct impact on how quickly we're able to deploy infrastructure, because the same folks who are out there installing and hardening the infrastructure are the ones who need to interconnect the electricity infrastructure for our transition, right? And so as you're speaking with heavy duty operators, they need to know that when they order their vehicles, the charging infrastructure is going to be there at the warehouse or at the depot or wherever they need to be charging. And so we are working intensely, very hard, very aggressively to work with utilities, with the Energy Commission, which is the entity that distributes the infrastructure incentives, with our team that distributes the vehicle incentives, so that we're working in very, very close coordination to get that infrastructure deployed at the same time the vehicle is deployed, and making sure we have a reliable, effective, low carbon grid to support the charging infrastructure that we need to make this transition.
Yes.
I think our biggest challenge will definitely be a question of rollout of charging infrastructure. We just set a new framework, legal framework for the municipalities, all 98 of them, which basically defines that they all need to make a plan for their municipalities for where our charging infrastructure going to be placed. They're not necessarily going to do it themselves, but they need to fix and organize where are the charging infrastructure going to be placed. They're going to make a plan for their city, for the rural areas, for wherever people live in condos, for instance, we have exactly the same challenge as you have in British Columbia. The very same problem with representation, and you need to convince your neighbors basically that it's a good idea to have a charging infrastructure in the parking lot and all of that. So the very same problems are there, but we need to make sure that this planning is in place. And of course, we do have some really groundbreaking municipalities, and some of them are the large cities. Copenhagen, for instance, the municipality of Copenhagen is really far when it comes to charging infrastructure. But also some of the very small, some of the islands, Samsø, for instance, Ærø, the city of Sønderborg, a couple of those are actually represented here at the COP26 because they're being recognized for their efforts. But we do have a lot of municipalities that are simply not there yet. So they really need to move faster. And because we do live in a democracy, because we do think that the local decisions should be taken locally, that can really be one of the showstoppers. And we don't want people to not buy a zero emission vehicle because there's a lack of charging infrastructure. So we can do a lot on the state roads, but we need the municipalities to do their planning as well, and give them all sorts of incentives, give them, for instance, money incentives where they can actually get state benefits if they move now. So that is one of the challenges, that we move fast enough, basically.
How are we doing for time? Okay. Great. So we're pretty lucky in BC because we've got an electricity grid that's 98% clean. We've got the second lowest electricity rates in North America, and we've got the highest carbon tax in North America at $45 a ton, now on a schedule to reach 170 in 2030. So a lot of the cards line up really well in BC to purchase an EV. The challenge I'll highlight is pretty basic one. We are a big province, about 4 times the size of Germany. So range anxiety is a real thing. And I actually am sympathetic to people that live in remote parts of the province, extreme weather in the winter. Not uncommon to have to drive 4 hours over 2 mountain passes to go to a doctor's appointment or visit family or friends. They're rightly concerned that if there's an accident or some sort of road closure, they want to be able to stay warm in their vehicles for 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours maybe. So that's something I think we need to get over in terms of technology. And frankly, that was the sole reason why we chose 90% instead of 100% in 2030.
Thank you. Regarding lessons, and as a municipality perspective, I think the first lesson that or what we have to work together is to fight against the status quo. Because the first answer you're going to hear when you want to start zero emissions vehicles projects, it's no, it's too expensive, or no, it doesn't comply with operative standards. And that's not true. If you ask them, have you looked at the data? Have you studied the international projects about it? Nobody has done it. So it's too much present in our citizens, this idea that electromobility is too expensive, or they don't comply with operative standards. And of course, that if you pay an electrical vehicle by cash, it's going to be more expensive than a combustion one. But when you are an institution as Vitacura, you can create a long-term conditions agreement, a leasing agreement, and it's going to be the same price competitive, or it's going to be competitive, and even more cheap than the other one. And that's not consider all the money that the state saves because of less pollution, less respiratory disease, etc. And another lesson that we have learned, and it's rarely mentioned in this when we speak about zero emissions vehicle, is the reduction of noise. because this is not just about environmental protection. This is about how we improve the quality of life of our citizens. And when you live near a street with a bus route, you really identify the difference because of having an electrical bus outside or a garbage electrical truck outside your home.
During your time at the conference, unless you're seated in a room with a people distance, eating or drinking or are medical needs. Thank you.
Good message. I certainly agree with that, especially living in New York City and especially on the garbage truck electrification. I think that's a great way to win over public opinion. So we're coming toward the end of the session, and so I'd like to just do a quick lightning round to close it out. Of course, today is about collaboration, increasing joint ambition around ZEVs. And so I'd like to just hear one thing that you're hoping that you're taking away from Copper that you are hoping will change as a result of today in regards to transportation electrification.
Well, I think first of all, I am glad that the United States is eagerly here. It's not just our friends in California that we are dependent upon. It's not uncommon, I think, for you to hear that we've always, from Europe, looked at California as the lead whenever new environmental legislation came out. That from your side, that became the trend, and we duplicated that in Europe. That goes all the way back to the 1980s. So, and of course, I hope that your inspiration will lead to a US that is as ambitious as California is. So I met Mr. Pete Buttigieg earlier today, and it was a pleasure to meet a U.S. Minister of Transport who is really eagerly interested in electrification when it comes to transport. That is really a pleasure.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's wonderful to have the federal government, as really in it to do this work, and it's very exciting. I think my takeaway from this experience is all of these conversations really highlight the shared challenges and opportunities. I hear a lot of the same concerns and a lot of the same excitement. So having this this interaction and sharing solutions and sharing ideas, it's just been a really wonderful experience, and meeting people, building these relationships so that I can call them up later and going, hey, I heard you were doing this. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So I really appreciate that interaction and that energy going forward.
Thanks. I mean, it's just nice to know we're not alone in BC, because there are a lot of voices in Canada and in BC who are telling us to slow down. We're way out in front. We're going way too far, too fast. But then I listened to the experiences on this panel. I didn't know that about Santiago, so I'm going to follow up like you did to see if we can get the same thing going in Vancouver. And, looking at that map you had around other major jurisdictions that have made commitments that are frankly even more ambitious than ours, it's inspiring and motivating.
Thank you. Well, it's really an honor to know that Chile is leading this kind of development, but as well, it's a challenge to know that the cities all over the world are working on it, because this is not who is the first one or who has most number of buses. This is how the world is going to work together to improve and to make this transition as fast as possible. So my conclusion is that as we have the experience on the electrical buses, you have experience in other sides of all this this challenge, and I hope we keep in touch and work together to have more zero emissions vehicles all around the world.
Fantastic. I think those are all great notes to close out this panel on, and I think the moral I take away from that is that a platform like the ZEV community and the Under 2 Coalition and the ZEV Alliance that provides a forum to keep these conversations going long after COP year round is really important. And so I am glad that we're here today to celebrate that, but it is just the beginning of the discussions, and look forward to working with all of these governments and any others in the audience. And I'll hand it back over to Nesa.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, everyone. And Dale just stole my concluding words. So my takeaway from today is that there is already a lot happening, a lot of collaboration taking place, a lot of lessons learned across jurisdictions, and it needs to continue, and it is crucial. And it's just wonderful to see all of these panelists coming here together and just sharing all of these experiences and having learned from each other. And that is exactly, like Dale mentioned, what we want to achieve with the ZEV community, bringing everyone together at every governmental level to ensure that the challenges that everyone is facing, no one feels alone. We're all working together towards solving them. And once again, just another call to action. I'd like to invite all governments to be ambitious. Convert your fleets to electric, or try to rise to that challenge, sign the ZEV pledge, and be a part of this community where everyone is trying to learn how to actually achieve that target. And thank you so much for coming. If you have some time, and I'm going to continue the conversation on EVs, they will be on the shared pavilion number 67 at 4:30 p.m. So you can make your way there, and hopefully the panelists will be around for any questions. Thank you so much, and have a lovely afternoon.
You think we can take a picture all together?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Andrés, if we move our masks on the picture, we'll keep them on. Yeah.
Okay. Say cheese.
We are.